Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. 2023 has wrapped up, which means it's time to talk about the best board games of the year. In this video, we're going to talk about the top 10 solo board games of 2023. I'm going to give you an overview of the game, tell you what the solo mode looks like, and then tell you my favorite part of the experience. Without further ado, let's get into the video with my top 10 solo board games of 2023. Starting off with number 10, we have Earth. This is a card-driven engine building game where you are going to be trying to build up an island. You do this through playing cards. You'll have a short amount of time to do so, but every round you're going to be choosing an action and using the resources available to you to pay for cards, and each card is going to have some sort of ability that will either give you some scoring, some passive ability, or have an additional effect that happens whenever a certain type of action is selected. When you play the solo mode, you actually have an individual board that serves as sort of a score counter for the AI, and it's also going to store all of their action cards that they're going to go through. Each time you play the solo mode, you'll go through the deck twice, and at the end of that, count up your score, compare it to the AI's. Each action card features an action that you get to do, and then an action that the enemy is going to get to do. And so you're trying to maximize as much value as possible from the actions that you're playing, and this game definitely speeds up the tempo of the experience as you only have 2 cycles of that deck to get your entire area filled out, as well as meet the criteria on all of these mid-game scoring cards, as well as setting up for the end-game scoring potential. Now, my favorite part about this game is the card draw rate and the acquisition of the cards, and this also feeds into one of my favorite types of cards, the event cards. These are special effects that you can use in order to modify the resources that are at your disposal, and so you're deciding whether or not to keep these in place of other cards that you can actually play in front of you. And this adds to the solo mode because whenever you acquire cards through the play card action, these cards are going to go into the enemy pile if you don't choose them, and the negative points are actually still positives for the enemy if you decide not to take them. So there's some pros and cons of picking up these events, and it's even more added to the solo mode experience. So that's my number 10, that is Earth. My number 9 goes to The Witcher Old World, an adventure fantasy game where you play as witchers, monster hunters who are out for some coin and do this by destroying and defeating creatures across the land. You'll be taking your hand of cards, using it to move around the board, leveling yourself up on the hunt of these monsters to gain special powers and abilities. Now, in the solo mode in particular, my favorite way to play it is using the Wild Hunt expansion solo mode, and that has you fighting an endgame boss, one of the members of the Wild Hunt, as well as their hounds that are going to be populating the board, and you'll need to squash them in order to gain access to the special abilities of the areas on the main game board. In addition, at the end of each round, the member of the Wild Hunt is going to chase you, and so you have to carefully decide where you're going to be moving during the round and what certain paths you're going to draw, and also combating with all of these different events and the regular creatures that populate the map. Now, one of my favorite parts about this game is the combat system, where you are comboing your different cards into each other. For example, if I play this yellow card, it has this purple icon, which means I can play a purple card afterwards, and that leads into a green one, and that leads into a yellow one, and so you're trying to chain this hand of cards that you get to cultivate, because as you play, you get to continuously add new cards into your deck. And so when you do combat, you get access to all of your cards, but when you take damage, you'll lose them from your deck, as well as once that's depleted from your hand, and it's a battle of attrition as you're trying to make your hand of cards last. And if you do link these cards, you get additional bonus symbols, which can give you things like defense, special abilities, and there are some cards in the expansions that allow you to get additional effects that aren't just the standard symbol. Paired with your more involved combo-centric combat, you have a simple-to-run AI system that's used using the standard deck of enemy attack cards. You're going to flip a coin to determine which of their attack moves they use, and each boss also features their own unique attack style, including reactions, meaning they're going to be some tough battles. And if you're able to defeat any of these monsters as you're playing the game, it is going to weaken that boss during that final endgame fight, so there are reasons to actually pursue and finish off the monsters during the game, in addition to the hounds and leveling up yourself for that final battle. So that is my number 9, that is The Witcher Old World. My number 8 goes to Apiary, a worker placement with a Space Bees theme. You're going to be sending out workers to collect resources, turning those resources into tiles, and working towards endgame scoring in the form of your seed cards that you can plant, or these endgame scoring tiles. The game has this progression system of your workers where every time that you recall them, they level up in power, and that power is going to allow you to access stronger actions, abilities, or just take pre-existing actions at better levels. I love this concept, and it's paired with all sorts of tiny small effects and abilities abilities, tiles that you're getting and putting in front of you. You have this management of the actual physical space and how you're comboing where those tiles are. There's adjacency bonus, special abilities, and things that you're going to want to jump on to add into your own personal hive. Now, the solo AI mode is a simple to run deck of cards. Every time it's the enemy's turn, they alternate between different colored workers. You'll flip the top card of the deck, and based on that resource card on the left side, it's going to tell you what worker that you'll need to play, and then on the right card is going to tell you where that worker is going to go based on the strength available to the enemy. Now, these numbers determine the strength of the opponent's actions as well as yours, and so that's going to determine what actions they tend to take. A lot of times they're going to try to just get as much value as possible from the tiles they're taking, and claim some of those endgame scoring cards, which puts pressure on you when you're actually taking your actions, but it has this sense of unpredictability that's easy to run and makes the solo mode a breeze. I think that Stonemaier does a great job with their Automa, and I think this is no exception. And my favorite part about this game, though, actually has to do with the strength of these workers, and that's the hibernation system. Once you get a worker to that top level, you get to take an action on the board, and the actions are super powerful. When you do that, you feel amazing, but the next time you recall that worker, it goes into the hibernation chamber. It's an area where you actually are going to compete for endgame scoring. And there are some cool swings that you can make where you see the solo AI start to build up in a specific hibernation area, but if you can successively take these incredibly strong actions, retiring your bees, they are going to be able to take up those remaining spots, give you resources in the process, and close out those endgame scoring areas. It's an amazing feeling. So I love that there's combo potential, reasons to get your workers to actually get sent to that hibernation area, but it also serves as the endgame timer. I love that you're careening to these gigantic turns, and the game itself feels explosive because of it. So that's my number 8 for solo. That is Apiary. My number 7 goes to Sky Tier Horde, a tower defense card game where a portal is spewing out enemies, and it's up to you to defend your castle from these enemies without losing all the cards in your deck or all the health of your castle. Now, every single round, you'll have an enemy phase where the enemy is actually going to spawn different cards onto the board, and then you'll have a time where you can react by spending your mana to put out cards. Now, based on the strength of the enemies, that determines how much mana you're going to get, so you get the resources to push back against terrifying threats. Sky Tier Horde is a single-shot experience that has you building a deck beforehand and taking it to defeat the enemy hordes. It's a modular encounter deck, and that's going to determine what enemies you fight, but you get to determine what color you want to play and what specific playstyle. You'll have allies that will go onto the board that you can use to defeat the enemy units. You'll have spells that buff up your characters and can give you special powers and abilities, and then these structures that you can continuously tap into for extra resources and benefits. With your cards, you're always trying to just get a bit more advantage than what the enemy is throwing at you, so that you can eventually overwhelm it with all of the advantage that you've slowly accumulated over the course of the game. Now, the enemy is also not a pushover. There are several encounter sets that you can mix and match the difficulty with that have enemies that will attack you and get closer to your castle, spells that will usually summon stuff while also doing something else terrible, and then when the enemies attack, they'll also use them as boost values in order to increase their numbers. And all of this is combined with a scenario boss that is your ultimate win condition for the experience, and you're trying to time exactly when you want to take this out. My favorite parts about this game are the multiple resource systems in it, and I'm not just talking about the spells and the mana and the cards themselves, but your loss conditions and how you tap into that constantly as a resource. A lot of times you may take damage to your castle just to spare the health of your characters so that you can buff them up the next turn with some spells. Your deck is actually also a loss condition. If you run out of cards in your deck, you automatically lose, but there are cards specifically in the green faction that benefit based on the number of cards in your discard pile or specific types of cards. So maybe you want to take some damage in order to power up those specific cards. And I love this concept that you are trying to take as much as you can when it comes to those loss conditions, but not doing it so much that you can eventually swing back and hit with some of your more powerful abilities and cards. It's a tense situation, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other expansion content's going to come for this game to open up the deck building a bit more and hopefully spill in these loss conditions and that type of resource into the other colors as well. So that is my number 7. That is Sky Tier Horde. My number 6 goes to Earthborne Rangers, an open world exploration card game where you play as rangers in a post-apocalyptic future. However, this has a more positive twist to it, as your entire society and humanity as a whole have come together to revitalize the Earth and bring it back into the green. A game of Earthborne Rangers has you shuffling up your deck of cards, and once that deck is depleted, your day is over. You'll have to try to complete as many missions as possible and decide how you interact with the people you meet throughout the course of that day, managing each card appropriately because you want to make the most of your time during this experience. One of the coolest things about this game is how you interact with the different cards that represent represent your environment. The creatures, the different obstacles that you might encounter, each of them will feature text that tells you how to actually interact, maybe potentially a task that you can complete, but they'll also mostly feature these colored ribbons on the bottom that determine what happens after you take a test. Every time you take a test, you'll flip a card, and then the bottom will have a specific color, and based on the cards that are out on the board and the areas you're interacting with, they are going to trigger each of their special abilities. This puts some pressure on you because you have an idea that something could happen. Your entire landscape could change based on the result of a test, so you have to be careful and selective when you actually engage with your surroundings because of the interactions that they may have between each other. My favorite part about this game is the card system for the players itself. Not only are the actions that you're taking satisfying, using your action points to pay for your cards or interact with the world, it makes you feel like you're getting a lot out of each turn, but I also love the deck building and construction. It sets itself apart from other LCGs because you get to determine the attributes of your character. These attributes determine the action points that you get each round, but also what cards you're able to actually include into your deck. If you want to play a specific card, you can set your action points to do so. You'll pair that with a third of your deck being from a specific class, the other third being from a specific background, and then lastly, you'll get some skill cards that you can use for your different tests, and then you also get to pick one set of cards that's just from anything, and that's going to make your deck completely unique because you have this card that just shouldn't be in there normally that you can make work, and I love that. If you have a card that's your favorite, you can put it into your deck pretty much no matter what. And also, if you find a card that just seems super cool, you can change your attributes to make it so you can play them. And the cards themselves are super specific or crazy powerful, and that's based on how they're tied to that strength of that attribute. For example, one of my favorite cards in this game, and it's insanely good, is a 1-cost A Dear Friend. It's a 3 spirit card, so you have to have 3 yellow to play it, but it allows you to search the deck for any human and put them into play. So this is crazy powerful for completing specific missions, or maybe there's a character that you want to find and had a loose end that you wanted to tie up. This card is great for that. So I like that there are cards that you give yourself reasons to include in your deck and can influence your attributes, but also reasons to play the other colors because this is not the only card like this that has a super useful effect. So that is Earthborne Rangers, my number 6. My number 5 goes to the Royal Limited. I want to be upfront with you, a copy of Royal Limited was provided to SideGame LLC for review purposes, but that doesn't mean it's not an incredible solo game. In the Royal Limited, you play as a conductor trying to assemble a train, and this train has to be completed with every single card at your disposal. You'll draw a hand of cards and then pay some cards to pay for others. Whatever the car's number is, that's the cost of cards you have to discard to actually put it into play, but then when you're sliding the tickets in at the top, you have to match either the number or the color, and it doesn't matter the number, you don't have to pay any additional cost, but when you slide those tickets in, they'll activate the abilities of whatever train cards you slide them into. You'll also have these special guests that you need to make sure go into your trains by the end of the experience, or you'll lose some points during the end of the game. You lose if you have 4 cards or more left over, but you are trying to get it to that ultimate 0 cards, making everything fit perfectly into your train. My favorite part about this game, though, has to be those VIP passengers. At the start of each game, you'll get 2 of these passengers that have their own unique conditions that are required to slot them in. It could be something like having 2 odd cards on either side. It could have something to do with the color of the train they're actually in, something that you get to plan for from the very beginning, and then you are setting up every single card to make sure that happens. I love this concept because these count as cards that you need to actually put into your train, so you have to make them work. Some of the expansions even lean into this even more, with needing to put them out in specific orders, and then there's a detective that has to go and look at a body, which is crazy, but from that core experience alone, I love this concept of having specific conditions that you have to reach and strive towards, giving you that long-term strategy, but playing tactically with your cards on the turn by turn with their special abilities and effects and making the most of what you get. So that is my number 5. That is the Royal Limited. My number 4 goes to 20 Strong. This is a solo dice game where you are going to be going through a gauntlet of enemies leading up to a final boss, getting powers and abilities along the way. Every game you'll start with a grip of dice. You'll have 20 total, 3 being stats and the rest being a pool that you can roll from and use them to take out different challenges. You'll get a health stat, you have a reroll stat, and then you have a refresh stat, meaning how many dice you can actually bring back and move for that next encounter. So you're managing your dice and using them to defeat these enemies, getting items as well as different powers and abilities to take down a final boss. In order to play a game of 20 Strong, you're going to need the core set, which comes with all the dice, but you'll also need one of the adventure packs. Now, the base game does come with Solar Sentinels, but the best best way to play this, and pretty much the only way that I play it, is with the Too Many Bones set. This takes all of the ideas and trappings of Too Many Bones and puts them into a portable system using that 20 strong framework. Now, this includes having your characters be the Gearlocks with their leveled up and 8+1 sides and their normal sides, a backup plan where you can store your misses on dice, as well as your final battle encounter being the Tyrants, which included their own special affiliation, as well as the timer for the entire game. This is also paired with the leveling up of enemies in the form of the BQ, where based on how many days have gone by, that determines the strength of your enemies. It's not just more enemies, it's stronger enemies with new effects paired with additional smaller enemies. So I love this concept of every 5 little enemies becomes 1 strong enemy, and it works perfectly here. You also have tyrant encounters that you're going to want to engage with because they will weaken the enemy during their final boss encounters. This is perfect as it takes everything that was small and just made the entire Too Many Bones experience work and puts it into a small package, giving you a way to play Too Many Bones in a portable sense. Another reason I love this Too Many Bones version of 20 Strong is the fact that it encourages you to use your weaker dice, and that's in the form of the backup plan. A lot of the times you would just use your strong dice and then refresh them with the refresh action, but in this version, your backup plan has an effect that triggers based on if you miss. So if you're picking dice that have worse chances of rolling, you have a higher chance of missing, meaning you get to fill up your backup plan, as well as some of the other items and abilities that you can interact with. The Too Many Bones version of 20 Strong is the way to play, and my favorite of the entire series for 20 Strong. That's my number 4, the strength of that Too Many Bones, putting it at this placement. Number 3 is Ancient Realm. This is another game that was provided to SideGame LLC for review purposes by publisher Button Shy Games. It has you playing a tableau building experience all about civilization creation. Every round, you're going to take one of these cards in this market area and place it in this row of cards in front of you. Your goal is to try to use your resources to build out wonders, which will give you scoring and passive abilities, while also juggling scoring conditions from mines that will generate money if you do end up covering them and getting rid of them. And that's my favorite part about this game, is the way that you're actually generating your resources in the game, and that's by taking cards and covering others. Every round, you're taking a card and either extending your tableau out, getting those icons and those symbols and abilities, or you're covering pre-existing icons in order to trigger the effects underneath them. I love this concept because you're always deciding what you want to actually cover, where you're positioning things for future coverings, and how much you can squeeze out of each of these cards and comboing them with the special abilities and effects that are available. There's another effect that's part of this market area that's a special event on this left side of this deck here. And this is going to give you an effect that you can engage with every round, and whenever you refill the market, you choose which side of the cards to actually refill from, so you can determine which event you want to keep out on top, so that way you can manipulate it to get even more value. Now, this game just went up for me recently by playing the Monuments and Misfortunes expansion. This raised it up a whole level because it adds 6 brand new cards that add some unpredictability to the experience. Now, this one I actually did buy out of pocket, but I think it is necessary for this game as it gives you more ways to score, more variability in the entire experience, and that uncertainty because you don't know what's coming out. And the last thing that it adds are misfortunes, which give you additional restrictions, but if you can keep them out, you get bonuses for doing so. Love this concept. Perfect expansion. That's my number 3. That is Ancient Realm. Number 2 goes to Oranienburger Kanal. This is a worker placement resource management game of chasing objectives. This is done through creating canals. Your goal is to place these cards in this player board in front of you and surround them with paths to activate their abilities. In the solo mode, you have a blocking token that's set up that stops you from using specific action spaces, and once it gets to the final action space, that marks the end of the round. Your goal is to use your actions as efficiently as possible to score the most points. Now, one of my favorite parts about this game are the cards themselves, and the solo mode has you cycling through these cards 2 at a time each round. Either you buy them or they're removed automatically, but you have a hard timer on when you can access these cards, so you're deciding when you need to purchase them, in what order, and if you even want to purchase them or you're waiting for that next cycle. I love this tactical play and the long-term strategy that comes from the cards, and it's gotta be my favorite part. Let's look at a couple of these cards and see how they work. For example, we have this Canal Shack here is worth 3 points. That's the cost on the top and resources to play it, 2 wood or 2 clay. And then it says on the bottom, if you have 1 or more water next to this card, when it's fully surrounded, you get 2 rocks or 2 bricks. Simple card, and one that you can activate willy-nilly just by passively having a single water tile next to it. I love that the complexity of these cards fluctuates, and some give you immediate resources you can tap into, or some are a little bit more tricky and you want to make work. You're deciding how much of these objectives you want to take on for that payout. Let's take a look at this tram shelter here. 2 points value. It's worth 1 clay to play, so easy to put out there. But to actually get the most benefit from it, you need to get 2, 3, or 4 of the train tracks next to it. And in return, you'll get 2 wood, $2, which is like a victory point that you can spend on things, and also an amount of victory points based on the amount of train tracks you're able to put next to it. So when are you going to actually stop putting train tracks by it? How many points are you going to try to squeeze out? And these are the green cards, which means they're the more basic cards, and things get more intense as you go further on. One of the coolest things about the cards, in addition to surrounding them with paths to activate them, you also can trigger them by putting bridges on them over the existing paths that you've already placed on your board. So this gives you ways to invest in more powerful cards in later rounds, and it's going to give you that satisfaction of reactivating and tapping in to these things you've already invested in. Oranienburger Kanal is an incredible solo experience with that timer and that satisfaction of reactivating abilities and objectives and determining how many you want to take on. Incredible game. That's my number 2. Before we get to my number 1, I want to give a shout out to the channel partner. This is Into the AM Studios. Into the AM Studios has large lines of apparel, but one of my favorites are their graphic design tees. I'm sporting one of their t-shirts now. I love nautical themes in board games. This one seemed like a no-brainer. I like the way that they feel. I wouldn't be wearing them if I didn't. If you want to support the channel, you can use coupon code SideGame Strong to get 10% off your order, and our channel will get direct kickback for you doing so. So it's a great way to support the channel without necessarily buying board games, and you can get yourself an amazing shirt. Make sure to use coupon code SideGameStrong for 10% off your order. Let's get to number 1. At the top of the list, my number 1 solo board game of 2023 is Voidfall. This is a space 4X Euro game where you play as an alien race trying to push back the terrifying Voidborn. These are intergalactic space zombies who have stretched their influence across the galaxy, and it's up to you to purge them and release the galaxy from their corruption. Every round, you'll be using your action cards to influence these different areas, pushing back the Voidborn, as well as contesting with the different threats that they put in front of you. You'll have your own faction with starting technology, a special ability, as well as an agenda card that's going to dictate how you score the majority of your points, but you get to customize these agenda cards as you play, gathering more of them, and then deciding what paths you want to actually proceed with while you're doing all the rest of your engine building and dealing with the threat that is the Voidborn. The solo mode features the Void Board. This is a clear way to track the Voidborn's influence on you and its stretch on the galaxy. Every turn you'll be drawing a crisis card that will tell you some type of condition you must do to get rid of it. You can do it now or you can do it later, but if you do it later, it's going to permanently affect you. At the end of the turn, it will go on to this Void Board and give you some negative bonus, whether it be increasing the strength of the enemy's attacks or giving you a continuous tax that you'll need to pay to this Voidborn in the form of resources. Once you put it onto the board, you have a single time that you can get rid of it by paying some type of resource now or victory points later, or you can decide to leave it there, and if you can satisfy the condition at some point in the future, it will be removed from the Void Board. So you can decide how many of these little objectives that you're going to be putting on this Voidborn, and if you can actually deal with the consequences in the immediate now. I love this concept as you're constantly juggling the immediate effect of these cards and how you're going to integrate these removal conditions into your future actions. As the game continues, your Void Board might look something like this. You'll have several cards that you've decided to maintain on the board that are sitting there waiting for you to complete them, but also some Harbinger tokens that may push the cards further. If they ever make it to the end of the row, you will get one of your 3 lost conditions, and if that happens, you lose the game immediately. So you're always trying to manage these cards, and the more that you progress in actually getting victory points by eliminating the enemy's units, you're actually increasing the difficulty on how to manage these cards. I love that concept that when you're progressing, you are intrinsically giving more power to the enemy by increasing their skirmish value or draining your own personal resources. I love the challenge of the Void Board, as not only do you have to deal with all these little objectives, but you still have to perform well in the game. There's a scoring criteria in the center based on your difficulty level that's going to determine what you actually need to do, what victory point threshold you must meet while juggling these objectives at the same time. This is a masterclass in solo design because it takes this gigantic, complicated game and lets you focus on playing the game just with new objectives that you get to factor into your decisions. There's no crazy upkeep or AI that you have to run. It's a simple card, an objective that you consider in your actions and then place on the board that affects future turns. This is perfect. As if I wasn't already jazzed about just the solo system in general and how brilliantly it works, the technology has to be my favorite part of of the game, as every round you'll have random technologies for each scenario that you get to tap into to either deal with the threat of the Voidborn or work on your engine building and point scoring. I love this concept because of the complexity of this game. There's so many cool things and creative things you can do with the technology that allow you to customize your experience in tandem with your faction and the objectives that you're chasing after in the solo mode. This game is incredible. 10 out of 10 experience. That's my number one. That's Voidfall. And that's the list. Those are my top 10 solo board games of 2023. I'd love to hear what you think about these games. What were your favorite solo board games from 2023, and which ones do I need to give a try? Thank you so much for watching. SideGame Strong.